Well, we're picking up where we left off last week, building the concrete scenery for the outdoor railroad.
Right.
And it's been a learning curve. We did all of this work last summer.
Don't you mean fall?
Well, it was September, but it was still 107.
Yeah, it was still summer.
It felt like summer, and so I'm calling it summer.
Or simmer.
Or simmer. At any rate, this time, the mortar mix, the concrete mortar mix is set up and it's hard and it's not falling off, and it even looks quite good.
Oh, I like it.
Finally the second or third time is the success anyway. And especially where it's connected to the cinder block. It really loves hooking itself to cinder block. To the pink foam, not quite so much. If you remember, we're making the mountains out of this pink insulation foam. And then we layer over the top of that with mortar mix. So I've started by marking off the base of where the mountain's going to be, and now I'm using this flatbed foam cutter.
Oh.
And boy, do I love this. We actually ended up with a couple of these. They all have different advantages. I like this one because it has a foot switch. At any rate, it will cut the foam very, very smoothly and evenly, and you can set up different kinds of angles. In this case, I'm cutting completely on a bevel here because the hot wire that cuts the foam is stretched down through here at this angle.
Oh.
And that will allow me to cut the edge of the hill as an actual hill. So I'm going to attempt to follow the line here that I've drawn, which is actually at the bottom of the hill. And then I'm working upside down and kind of using the angled wire to cut out where I think the base. I'm not very good at staying inside the line.
No, it's because you're working upside down. You gotta get right side up.
Even in the second grade, my teacher would come by. You're not staying inside the line with your crayon. And I'd say, where does it say in the Constitution that I'm required to stay inside the line?
Yeah, nobody does.
I'm an outside the line kind of guy. Anyway, I'm attempting to follow that because I don't want it to run afoul of the tracks or the wheels on the locomotive or any problem, because I drew that line on there so that it would be clear of the trains.
Right, and this is how Etch-a-Sketch was invented.
And now I've changed the angle slightly because I don't want the hill to be completely uniform. So in those little kind of gully, canyon-ish, there's places where I want it to be steeper. And so now I'm coming back and working steeper.
That looks like a lot of fun. I just want to go try some foam and just cut it for the heck of it.
Oh, it's enormous fun, and it all stinks. It smells of burning plastic.
This time stinks is good.
Well, yeah, in this case, it's outdoors and the birds all left. But other than that, there was no problem with the smell. Now, I'm also cutting in different areas here to kind of bevel the edge into where it has to fit into the retaining wall and those kinds of things. But some of it's just sort of freelance.
Right.
It's like everything else creative. A lot of it you just sort of make up as you're going along.
I know those aren't the Finger Lakes up there.
But that's the poor pink Panther. I ended
Panther?
up... Panther! Now, here's how you seam two pieces together. You want the bottom of one to line up with the top of the other, so I flip the bottom one upside down, lay it on top of the next piece, mark out my line. That will become the bottom of the piece that fits on this one. I flip it back right side up, and again I'm working upside down.
Wow, it looks just like a slip strike fault.
But you can see how once this is spun over, the bottom of one will actually line up with the top of the other. It's kind of I'm not going to call it clever, but it's just a system for bringing the two pieces together. Look at that. They line up more or less perfectly, in spite of the fact I can't stay inside the lines.
Well, that's fine.
That's fine. Oh, it's not too coarse.
And here we have the fault.
Well, at some point you have to seam the two pieces together. So yeah, there's a fault line here. And I want to make sure that the fault lines are perfectly square to the backside of the foam. So rather than just sort of freelancing that in, I'm using my framing square so that when I put all of this together, it should all sort of fit together like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle.
Oh.
And then I'm also numbering these pieces because, you know, you get a pile of this going on and suddenly it's like, where does this piece go?
Mm-hmm. Or you throw away something that was important.
Yes, been there, done that. So everything's numbered and it all stacks up because in a few minutes I have to take it all back apart so I can glue it all back together. But I can't glue it back together till it's all... I can't put it back together because I haven't put it together the first time. Anyway, I can't glue it together until it's all cut out. So at some point I have to take it all apart and then glue it all back together.
I'm glad you numbered it.
Yeah, me too. 1A, 2B, that sort of thing.
To be or not
To be or not to be. Now, as I was working, from time to time I would place this little building over here because eventually there's going to be a minor little mine complex over here. And I wanted to make sure that it would look okay and that I had enough space as I was building the rockwork to accommodate the mine, but I had no idea what I was going to use for a mine or how big that would be until we went to St. George.
Right.
In St. George, there's this fun model railroad club, the Color Country Model Railroad Club, and Larry Snyder is one of the members down there who has this really neat backyard railroad.
Right.
And he has some really fun structures, and one of them is this really cool sort of tipple or mine structure or something. But I thought, that looks like something that might work in the area where I want to put the mine if it's not too big.
Right.
But right over there, the Kearns Coal and Oil Company, I thought, I think that's the plan. Let's put one of those in there.
Exactly.
And I think I can make it fit. I just need to find one. So I went to the source of all human knowledge and the source of all products, eBay, and I had the part number from Larry for this Pola kit, and I found one that somebody had on their railroad for years, and they wanted to get rid of it. And I thought, you know, a little paint, a little glue, and I think it's a thing.
Yeah, isn't that fun? I like eBay for that reason.
I love that.
Oh, man, always a treasure.
So back on the railroad, I found that it will fit just barely, and now I need to cut the other profiles in and then glue it all together. I started using this PL375 based on a recommendation from one of the commenters here on the channel, and it works great.
Oh, it does.
And I thought it might attack the foam. No, it's designed for foam and roofing and you name it, and it just works.
Nice.
It just works. So that's the new go-to adhesive out here on the outdoor railroad. Loctite PL375. Anyway, I put a good dose of that on all of the different pieces and then just started sticking it all together.
Like a big puzzle.
Like a big puzzle. Notice that's number 1L. So
1L?
it's, for one left. First level left side.
Not the one that's left, but the one that's left.
And that's 1C. And then I also put grabber screws down through here to help the glue, mostly just so that the glue would set up properly, but it gives it a little extra strength that I just ran grabber screws down through here as well.
Something tells me a seagull flew over.
I think it was an endangered condor, but
I hope that's all it was.
it was actually this Gorilla Glue that I'm using out here. Original formula Gorilla Glue is water activated, and so when the cement hits it, it foams up like that. Notice as soon as this stuff hits there, and then I'd already wetted down the area, so as soon as I put the glue on there, it immediately started to foam. But it just percolates up through the mortar mix and really attaches that to the foam. Otherwise, it just falls off the foam.
Yeah.
Like the first batch did.
Yeah.
So what's really holding this together, a large part of what's holding this together, is that original formula Gorilla Glue slathered all over the foam before I smear the mortar mix on there. And at that point, no, it's actually quite rigidly hooked to the foam.
It's staying there.
It's staying put, unlike the first attempt, which all fell on the ground.
Yeah.
So there used to be that funny old riddle. You know how Michelangelo carved the David?
No.
He took a block of marble and then took away everything that didn't look like David.
What?
Well, that's the old joke. And so that's kind of what I kept thinking is like, go ahead and slather mortar mix all over and then just take away everything that doesn't look like stone.
I was going to say, mortar mix? Don't do that.
So I just, if what I'm doing looks right, I call it right. If what I'm doing looks wrong, I call it wrong. And then I just keep going until hopefully I end up with a proper cliff face. Notice over here, I'm also gouging the heck out of the foam before putting the mortar mix on there with the glue. Just a little extra tooth in the foam there to help the mortar mix have something to grab a hold of. After that first batch just all fell off, I've been shy about it, gun shy, if you will. That I was just afraid that this whole thing would fall apart again. But so far, once it sets up, it's really quite strong. And then the other thing I keep having to remind myself, thicker is better, thicker is better, thicker is better, because a thin coating on here will still fall off. But if it's a couple of inches thick on there, first of all, it gives me more that I can carve into. But the bigger thing is it's thicker is stronger once it's dry, and therefore it's much more likely to not fall off.
Oh, it wouldn't dare after all this.
Boy, it's, what can go wrong does.
And did.
And did. Now, again, when you're putting this stuff on top of cinder block, like I'm doing over here, it really wants to stick on there so much better. It'd be nice if I could build the whole mountain out of cinder block, but I have to use the foam because I can cut it easily, and cinder block would be a lot harder to do. But in these areas back here where I'm just sculpting on top of the cinder block, oh, that works so much better because I don't know, there's something about the cinder block. It's got just the right amount of holes and tooth and everything, just it gives it a lot of surface area to grab a hold of, and I don't even use any Gorilla Glue back here. I just press it into the cinder block and it's there. It's there. Now, it does crack. And some people online here said, well, that's because it doesn't have any steel in it. And if you don't have reinforcement inside there, as it dries, it shrinks. And as it shrinks, it cracks. It's still really strong, or at least it seems to be.
I hope so.
But then there's been a whole bunch of people saying you really need to put a metal mesh or a fabric in the cement. Otherwise, it's going to crack like that. But in a lot of those areas,
it's fine if it does.
Mountains crack.
Yeah, exactly. It's nobody's fault.
It's San Andreas's fault.
That's right.
I'm blaming him. At any rate, I wanted to use a little foam back here so it doesn't look just like a big cinder block wall. And so I glued some foam in place over here, and then I added cement over the top of that. And again, those cracks, as long as they don't open up and the whole thing falls apart, I'm okay with the look. I am a little concerned about the strength and about it falling apart. Anyway, same process here. Slather original formula Gorilla Glue, because there's 170 different kinds of Gorilla Glue. Yeah,
at least.
But that original one they came out with is water activated, and that'll just sit there staring at you until you add water to it, and then it all foams up. And so as soon as the mortar mix hits this goopy stuff on here, boy, it really foams up and it really adheres. So you can see as I'm pressing that on there, just pressing it on, it's grabbing a hold. It's really sticking. Otherwise, it would just slump right off of there and fall on the ground.
I hope it doesn't grab a hold of your trowel, though, because you'd have a hard time explaining that.
I've actually found that I have to
pull that out.
Keep the trowel wet, or it'll all glob up on the trowel.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, I pressed all that onto the foam, and I kept smearing that on good and thick. Remember, thicker is better, thicker is better. And now I'm using a putty knife here to kind of shape that and get it in place. And already I started to find that there is one problem when working on these really vertical surfaces like this. When you're putting it on properly thick, it's also properly wet and heavy, and it all starts heading for the ground.
Of course, that's called a slump in science, you know.
A slump. Yeah, I understand the gravity of the situation. But So I got it looking exactly the way I wanted, and it all sort of tipped over like a cake that's fallen. But you know, it doesn't bother me. That's called erosion.
Yes.
If someone comes along and they criticize that and say it all slumped over to one side, I'll just say, that's erosion.
That's what a slump is.
That's how it's not supposed to happen.
Go back and study your biology, boys and girls. Your earth science.
So there it is. There it is. And I'm okay with it kind of slumping over to one side.
Hey.
I did sort of have to keep poking it back up so that the whole thing didn't just completely tip over. But once it reaches a certain kind of firmness, it stops slumping over. And then it seems to be just fine.
It stops.
Now, over here I wanted to try a suggestion from your sister.
My sister uses cheesecloth. She makes yard sculptures.
Yeah, kind of gnomes or something?
Yeah, gnomes, garden gnomes, this, that, yeah.
And she said the cheesecloth will provide the amount of strength that you need so it won't crack. And I went to the hardware store, and yeah, they make different kinds of cloth for doing this, but the cheesecloth is so much easier to work with. I thought if it works for your sister, it'll work for us.
That's right.
So I put a first coating down, and now I've layered some cheesecloth on top of here. And now I'm putting a next coating into that and making sure it all presses into the cheesecloth. And so far, it's actually making the whole thing run a lot smoother, because now it's not slumping over quite so readily either. This is on here really quite thick because there's a good inch of it under the cheesecloth and more over the top of that. And so far, the cheesecloth is working quite well.
Sort of reminds me of an old plaster cast.
Yeah, exactly. Except we didn't break anything. I hope we didn't break anything.
Hope not.
Anyway, we'll know as this dries. If it doesn't crack the way the other section did, then that means that the cheesecloth is doing what the cheesecloth is supposed to be doing, and that's as this shrinks, it'll keep it from cracking.
Success.
And there it is.
Yes.
So I kind of went in and did my usual. If it doesn't look like the Statue of David, I'm getting it wrong. So in this case, if it doesn't look like Southern Utah, just keep pushing it around till it looks like Southern Utah. And then move on to some other section and make it look like Southern Utah. You know, if it looks right, it's right. If it looks wrong, it's wrong.
Too bad they can't do that the whole state. Yeah, no, just kidding.
I'm not sculpting the salt flats.
No, well, yet.
Now notice the Gorilla Glue oozing out down at the bottom there, and that's one of the weird things about the Gorilla Glue. But if it really becomes offensive and I get big globs of condor manure, I can just scrape it away while it's still soft.
That's the way it does work, condor manure.
Yeah.
Off your windshield,
Yeah. And then the broken pieces from the failed attempts, I just keep pressing those in at the bottom of the cliff.
Yep.
And then I was concerned that this had all just come loose after it dried. That's the hardest part of the whole cliff. I actually had to chisel part of this away for the mine building, and I couldn't do it. I had to bring out dynamite in order to get some of that stuff out of there. This stuff actually, when everything's working just right, it really dries hard.
It's there forever.
And fortunately, after this all dried, no, it didn't crack.
Nice.
It was all just fine. So cheesecloth, score. That works.
That's off to my sister.
Exactly. Anyway, I was working as quickly as I possibly could, because even though it's 107 out here, it also is late fall. And it's going to snow any time now.
Yes.
And I wanted to make sure this was all in place before it turned from summer to winter overnight.
And it can do that here.
And it did.
Yes, it did.
And yes, it did. And I also wanted to get the color on here and the waterproofing before that happened. So I was moving as quickly as I could, because there's the final look right there.
Isn't that pretty?
With the color in place, and the leaves even changed for about 3 days before it snowed.
Yep.
Well, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, you can become a subscriber to the channel by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet, and we hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Tuesday, because we're building a model.
Yes.
See you then.
We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.